What you're about to hear is a follow up to Chapter 1 of Certified Financial Planner Steve Smith's book, Power Up Your 401k: The Employee Trail to Retirement. So, Steve, in chapter 1, it was all about mapping out your strategy. And before we get into some of the particulars of what you talked about in the first chapter, we've got to obviously highlight that you have several mountain biking, riding analogies and terminology throughout the opening of the book. I know it's going to be a theme throughout the entire book. And it's because you're an avid rider, as you talked about a little bit. And just give us some background on how did you get into bike riding and mountain biking, and why that's such a big passion for you.
If I'm not in the office or hanging out with my family and going to their sporting events and things, I'm usually found out somewhere on a trail or on a road. And I live in an amazingly beautiful place, so you can take roads through mountains and long streams. So I just really love the solace and peace that I get from that experience, but also get off the road and hit the mountain bike trails. And I just love connecting with nature. Maybe that comes from my farming background as a child, but also just seeing the beauty. It's just inspiring when I come back to my family or come back to the office, just getting on that bike and seeing the beautiful things, and spending time with others. I don't always ride alone, of course. So spending time with others just really is a reset for me. And I wanted to share some of those passions and lessons, because they correlate so well to financial planning and the work we do as a financial advisor.
Your story about your dad kind of giving you a little section of land and inspiring you to basically start your own business and be able to keep the returns of your efforts there. I mean, you chuckle about those things, but man, when you're exposed to something like that as a youngster, those things really stick with you for many years. I'm thinking of stories off the top of my head and in my own life that are the same way, where if they didn't happen, you wonder if you would have the same kind of development and inspiration and passion. So that must have been something that really stuck with you for a long time to really maybe put you on the path to where you are today as an advisor.
It did. It had a different perspective. A lot of my friends would maybe work for a certain amount of dollars per hour, and I really wasn't exposed to that early on. It was more about producing a result. I raised part of our acreage was raising pigs, and you would have to get a loan, so you're in the hole, and then you would have to buy them, and then you would have to feed them, more loans in the hole, and then at the end you would sell them, cover all of that, and you would end up with a wonderful profit. And that is that result. And sometimes there was ups and downs. They would get sick, and sometimes they would get out, and you would worry that if you lost one or one died, that would, all of those things. It just made me look at the world from a very different perspective of producing results. And that's what I also bring to the table for my clients. It's not just about being a nice guy or having a really witty thing to say. It's about producing results.
Yeah, it's a great point. Let's talk a little bit about then the planning and building that map. You talked about the importance in that first chapter of mapping out your financial strategy, making sure that it's tailored for each individual. So for folks listening to the audiobook or watching our visual version on YouTube, for folks who might be overwhelmed by that idea, mapping out my entire financial strategy, I mean, it just kind of sounds difficult, sounds hard, sounds a little overwhelming. What might be the first couple of steps that they could take to start that mapping process with some confidence and just avoid some of maybe that that feeling of being overwhelmed that many might feel just kind of hearing that offhand?
It's a simple response, but I would encourage everyone to connect with a certified financial planner, or if you can't find a certified one, at least a financial planner, to really understand how to do that, because it's hard to have that vision without knowing all the steps and the building blocks to it. It's almost like telling somebody to go to Eureka, Nevada, which is kind of in the middle of nowhere. And if you don't have a map and somebody says, well, I think it's kind of northeast of here, that's probably not a wise thing to just start walking.
Right.
So you want to find someone who has that map that can take your unique situation and do something with it. And now all of a sudden, we're recommending maybe you should take a car and not walk. Maybe you should turn right onto US 50 off of Highway 395. And some of these instructions that really are critical, they sound simple. And when you're driving, they are simple if you know where they are. It's just
Yeah.
really, really good. And the same thing with driving there, you want to have a speed limit. That's don't take too much risk because you might get out of control if you can't handle it. And if you work with someone who's been there before and knows the way, it's a lot better for your outcome.
I see how advice and even the questions you ask can mature over time. You know, if I'm on a trip from, I don't know, the East Coast to the West Coast, I just kind of want to be pointed in the right direction first of all. Hey, which way is the West? That way, and that's sufficient advice at that point. But you're right. As I get a little bit closer, as I navigate west, then I start asking a little bit more questions. Like, all right, well, should I go through Kansas or should I go further south through Texas as I march my way across the country? What are the pros and cons of those two items? And then when you get inside the city, you're right. It just pointing me in a direction is not going to help. I need details of an address, the building, the lefts and the rights, and
Yep.
where to park, and all those other details start to become more sophisticated over time. And so I think that's a good analogy as well. You had a chapter, obviously, or in this chapter, you focused on that focus and faith in
Yeah.
financial planning, and I thought that was pretty interesting. I'm curious, what advice do you have for clients who maybe struggle with that? They feel anxious about their plan. They may want to make adjustments when they're feeling an emotional tug. Perhaps it's a market downturn or bad news or a life event that forces them or makes them feel forced to pull some lever to make a big change. How do you help navigate people through that focus and faith through the process while also dealing with the changes of life and the emotions that come along with it?
Well, there's a lot of situations I could go with, but I'm just going to give you an example
Okay.
of a couple things that come up frequently. So for one, focus is I tell the client what they can focus on. This is typically after that map has been put into place. So I have them focus on the contributions that they can make. Focus on not go into debt. Don't use a credit card as an emergency fund. Those types of things that we can plan for. And when they happen, they're not a tragedy. It's just something that we make an adjustment for. That's that focus. So when that happens, okay, well, we got this emergency fund savings. We just go pay for that situation. The other thing is the faith side of that, focus and faith. It's faith in the future. And I many times reference when something's happening, like an election cycle, and some folks, depending on how your political views are, can have a lot of fear if the other side gets in, or maybe if your own side gets in. I don't know. But there's a lot of fear, and I credit that to all the ads and different things that go on in the world. It's not necessarily just the clients. There's a lot of fear feeding in, through the news networks. And if you're in a battleground state like me, it's nonstop. There's almost more ads than there is television these days. But once the election's over, that subsides, as it always does. But what I do is I take them down a journey rather than feeding into the fear of whatever financial crisis or downturn in the market, and I will take them back to wherever they want to go, depending on the age of the client. Maybe it's 2008. Maybe it's just a smaller drop, like in 2018 in the fourth quarter, if it was a fast pop and drop. Or is it something more systemic like 2008, and how the world didn't end? And it only was a major loss for those that panicked out when it started to look bleak.
I like that positive approach that you take to the outlook of the future, it's interesting that you tie that almost into being necessary to have this financial success and really central to your planning. It sounds like you also want to see that vision and that spirit in the clients that you work with, and you mentioned being very intentional about who you take on and who you work with. What can you expand on that a little bit? What are the qualities in a client that you find make for the most successful financial journeys and retirements, and how does that reflect in your own approach to finances?
Yeah, A few of the things that I look for, and it's mentioned in the chapter as well, but I want people to be open, and meaning they want to have an open conversation. Some people are really don't want to know how bad their situation is, or potentially even how good it is. They just like, you handle it, you do it. I don't really want to have anything to do with that. Well, I really don't want to be the patsy for that plan, because if they're not open in a conversation of what they're trying to achieve, where's the end? Where's the goal? So I really need to have that, because I don't want to be the financial advisor that takes too much risk for them or not enough. So they need to really be willing to share their situation and their goals and dreams. Because one thing I know is money touches almost everything in life.
Mm.
Money funds school fees. Money funds mortgages or rents. The biggest reason for, unfortunately, couples separating is money fights. So I can bring a lot of calm and peace and wisdom to that before something tragic like that can happen.
So, in the book and in chapter one, Steve, you talk a little bit about the importance of elevating your gaze when it comes to financial planning. And I'm curious if there are any moments in your own life where you had to keep your focus on the bigger picture, as you describe in chapter one, despite challenges or setbacks, and how that shaped your mindset.
Very good. The whole topic on raise your gaze really is something tragic that happened when I was much younger. And when you're on a motorcycle or a dirt bike or a bicycle, and you're going off the road, or even if there's an obstacle on the road, if you stare exactly at that problem, at that obstacle, there's a super high probability you're going to hit it like I did, and completely wiped out and remove
Mm.
a few layers of skin off of my elbows and arms.
Ooh.
It was a little rough. Nothing that was, a lot of bandages and some blood didn't cure. But that can happen when people get wrapped up in things like elections or financial crisis or whatever the news du jour is of that particular time period or day. And raising your gaze is taking it from that obstacle on the ground that the news cycle is promoting to you, and raising it up and looking past that to what's coming up. So a lot of times when you're biking, or even when you're driving down the road, all of us have this experience, and there's an obstacle on the road that fell off of a truck or something like that. And you look at who's coming on oncoming traffic, the other lane over here, and you look, what is my path to swerve through, or is it full brakes? Those are your choices. Or I guess hit it is your third one, which is probably the worst of all of them. Hopefully that isn't your option. The point is that raising your gaze and being aware in that peripheral vision of what's going on around you makes that crisis of obstacle much less, especially if it's not congested. And if you have someone to help you, because it's intuitive when you're on the road, but it's not as intuitive when you're dealing with financial things that you're not normally talking about. And to consult an advisor, to have somebody to text, to have somebody to email or call, makes all the difference, so we don't wipe out on that obstacle in the road.
Steve, thank you for your insights into chapter one. We're looking forward to hearing what chapter two has in store. The book, of course, is Power Up Your 401k. You can get a copy at powerupyour401k.com. Click a link in the description of today's episode, and you can find that information where you can download a copy of your book, and get more episodes and information. Of course, we've got the whole thing read out on YouTube. There's an audiobook version of it, and of course, a written version as well. What you just heard was details about chapter one, mapping out your strategy, where it sets the stage for a journey toward financial freedom using a unique biking metaphor, of course, as you just heard a little preview of. If you'd like to read chapter one and more, again, go to powerupyour401k.com. We'll see you next time, right back here on Power Your Retirement. This podcast is provided by Powerhouse Financial Advisors, an independent firm with advisory services offered through Parsonex Advisory Services, Inc., PAS, a federally registered investment advisor. The information provided is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered as personalized investment advice. PAS does not guarantee the accuracy, completeness, or suitability of this information for your specific circumstances. Investment decisions should be based on an individual's goals, time horizon, and risk tolerance. Past performance is not indicative of future results, and all investments carry a degree of risk, including the potential loss of principal. Any case studies, testimonials, or endorsements shared in this podcast are illustrative of individual experiences and may not be representative of the experience of all clients. They do not guarantee future performance or success. You should not infer any level of assurance regarding future financial outcomes. Listeners should consult with a qualified financial, tax, or legal professional before making any investment decisions. Parsonex Advisory Services, Inc. does not provide tax or legal advice. Be sure to consult with your tax and legal professionals regarding your specific circumstances. For a copy of our Form ADV Part 2A, which provides additional information about PAS, including our advisory fees and services, please visit powerhousefinancialadvisors.com.